Welcome to Season 5 of SheVentures. I am your host, Doria Lavanino. SheVentures is a podcast about women and their work and life pivots. I believe in the power of storytelling. I also believe that if you change one woman's life, you start to change a family or a community. Our mission is to elevate the diverse stories of everyday women in their work. One promise, no mansplaining ever. Sit back, listen, and hit subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us at SheVenturesPodcast.com. Today, this Harvard MBA facilitates leadership and organizational development. Her clients include names such as Google and JP Morgan Chase. She's worked as a consultant, a workplace facilitator, an entrepreneur, as a freelance writer, and as a book author. She's written the book, Intelligence Isn't Enough, A Black Professional's Guide to Thriving in the Workplace. She's here to discuss her journey and provide insight on how to overcome some of the professional hurdles facing Black professionals. Carice Anderson, welcome to SheVentures.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited about the conversation.
Me as well. I always research my guests, and I noticed that your work life seems to be split between the American South and Johannesburg, South Africa. And so that is a pivot moving that people normally don't think about. And I just wanted to ask, what was your decision behind working on different continents?
Well, I wish I could say it was a much more, liberated reason why I went, but I went for a man, Doria.
I already knew the answer.
I went for a man, So my husband, who I met when I was at Harvard Business School, he's class of 2005, I'm class of 2006. We met there, but we didn't start dating till 3 years later. And in that time, he had moved to South Africa. So we were long distance for 3.5 years before we dated, were engaged, even married for a year before I moved to South Africa. So that is the reason. I think in terms of the decision behind, because he could have moved to the States because my husband is American. Mm-hmm. But I think I thought to myself, if I don't do this now, I might never do it. And I might look back later and regret that I didn't do it. So I try to make decisions with a very long-term lens. I try to think 20, 30 years down the line. Will I be upset that I didn't take this opportunity? And if I am, then I say, go for it. And that's pretty much how I thought about it. And I'm so glad I did, because I don't know if I would have wanted to move now. My parents are older. My husband's father has passed away and his mom is, in the U.S. by herself. So I think I'm so glad that I actually did it when I did, because I don't know if I would have done it now. And I would have always had to live with the what if.
Oh, isn't that the truth? I realize that too now, that in one's 20s, when you have less responsibility, everyone has certain pressures, obviously, but you have a lot more flexibility. And it is an ideal time if there's something that you are kind of like, I'm a little afraid of this. It's a big change, but it is a great time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's also awesome that you were young and able to think with that long-term lens, because I think that's uncommon.
Yeah, and I don't even know where I got that from, to be honest. I don't even know if it was an original, if it was something that I read somewhere, but I'm glad I was able to have that perspective, because otherwise I don't know if I would have had the courage to do it. Because it's a huge change. I think when I moved to South Africa, I knew 4 people, and one of them was my husband. So I knew a few people from business school, but I didn't have a network, and, I left everything behind. I had a job that I loved. I had, a church, family, friends, a house, everything. So to give all of that up and to move there was, and I'm not someone who's a huge fan of change. I know this about me, but I kind of like to keep things the way they are.
The status quo. So, yeah,
exactly. And that's why I talk about it in my book, about if we can get over that discomfort of that change, there's so much on the other side of it. And I'm so glad that I didn't miss out on meeting all these interesting people, writing this book. I wouldn't even be talking to you probably if I hadn't gotten over that discomfort. working at amazing companies. Like I would have missed out on all of that if I leaned into my comfort as opposed to leaning into that discomfort.
Yes. And leaning into discomfort is difficult, but you're right. That's where we grow the most.
Absolutely.
I wanted to also ask you this before talking about your book. As a Black woman in the American South and as a Black woman in Johannesburg, were there any contrasts or similarities as a professional?
It's such an interesting question, Doria, I must say, and it's a bit of a loaded one. So I think, obviously growing up, I grew up in Alabama. I spent the majority of my career in Atlanta, which is also where I live now. And, as a Black woman, you face kind of some of that discrimination on multiple fronts, right? From a race standpoint and also from a gender standpoint.
Right.
When you go to South Africa, I definitely think as an American, when Black South Africans would see me, they would think that I was Black South African and they would just be like, she's just another Black South African. Then as soon as I open my mouth and they hear my accent, they become much more interested in me and want to know, how did you get here? And why did you leave there to come here? Which is something I'm not used to in America. So I definitely think my Americanness trumps my Blackness in South Africa.
That's interesting.
And yeah, if I had been a Black, a Black foreigner from another country, so Zimbabwean or Nigerian, I don't think I would have received that warm welcome that I did once I opened my mouth. And it's very weird to me because I didn't experience that here, but there, something about being American. People are really interested and fascinated by the country. I think we've done an excellent job of selling the really great parts of American culture to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So people have bought into that. And so that is probably the biggest difference. I definitely think, in African culture, the patriarchy is much stronger there, I must say. I mentioned that my husband is American, but he's first generation Zimbabwean American. So when we go to Zimbabwe, especially in the rural areas, I have to be a little bit more deferential, and people are asking me why I don't have children.
Yeah. Well, you brought this up in an interview that you had that I think it was when you got married, you had to, something about, was it washing their feet?
Washing the hands of my husband's elders as a formal way to introduce myself to them the night before we got married. Yeah. So it's wildly different than how I grew up, right? But it's, making those sort of cultural adjustments. And I think we have to do that at work too.
Yes.
To be able to bridge those gaps and make those connections and build those relationships, we might need to step outside of what is familiar to us in order to be able to do that. And that's exactly why I wash their hands, to be able to make that connection between them and me.
Exactly. And I'm sure that it started to foster that kind of genuine, authentic connection.
Absolutely.
What were some of the professional and personal challenges you faced as the first person in your family to enter the corporate world?
I mean, I think, some of the challenges I faced, I didn't even know I was actually facing them at the time, right? Because I thought I had it all together.
Don't we all?
Yeah. I was like, that it's that youthful ignorance and arrogance, right? You're 22, I got the degree in the right subject. I majored in marketing, had really good grades, started working for a really, great company. So I'm thinking, my work here is done. I'm ready to conquer the world. And I don't think it was until probably a decade, maybe 15 years later, where I realized there were so many mistakes that I made. And I saw them in other people. I saw other people making the same mistakes that I made in 1998. And I was really surprised, Dory, because, I'm about to date myself, but when I graduated from undergrad, the internet was 5 pages long and you could get through it in about 7 minutes, right? So it was not a resource that we could turn to. But fast forward, I'm thinking, well, these young people have the internet, they have social media, they have online courses, they have audio books. Like, you guys have everything at your fingertips. And what I realized is if you don't know what you don't know, you don't even know what questions you should be asking or what information you should be seeking. And that's why I wrote my book, to just basically put it in people's faces and say, look, read this.
And let's talk about the framework of your book.
So the framework for my book is know yourself, know others, know your environment. Bring the three of those together so that you can build a personal brand and a communication style that allows you to have maximum impact. So everything I'm talking about in my book is driving towards you having impact, but being able to do it in a way that is authentic to who you are, but that is also value adding to other people and that works in that environment. So, the first 3 main chapters in my book are know self, know others, know your environment. And I really feel, I talk about them as like the corporate muscle groups, the 3 corporate muscle groups. And I say, we've all seen people who work out, but they have like really big upper body and they have like their legs are like this.
Yeah.
And I heard this personal trainer talking about when we don't exercise all the muscle groups in our body, we put ourselves at risk for injury. It doesn't create a body that can reach its full potential. And I thought, oh my God, it's the same thing when we don't exercise those corporate muscle groups. When you don't know yourself, you can't show up in an authentic way that's sustainable for you and that gives you energy. When you don't know other people, if I don't understand what you need and what your aspirations are and what keeps you up at night, I can't really craft and shape and show up in a way that's helpful to you. And if I don't know that environment, I can't show up in a way that works there, because what works somewhere else may not work here. So you have to integrate the knowledge of all 3 to be able to show up in a way that works for you and works for other people and works for that environment.
Going back to what you said before, I think it was so important that people didn't know what questions to ask. With your framework, how will they position themselves to know? Will it happen automatically as a result of knowing oneself, knowing where they're at, etc.?
Well, I think it's something that it's going to evolve over time, right? And because I was giving a talk the other day and somebody asked me, when did you know that you knew yourself? And I said, I know myself better than I did 10 years ago, but I keep evolving and I keep getting into new situations that tell me new things about myself or tell me things I still need to work on. It's a lifelong process, but I think if people can start to sort of figure out, who am I? What are my strengths and areas of development? What energizes me? What are my boundaries? What is the authentic version of me? Then I think you can position yourself around people and in environments that value what it is you bring to the table. It's an evolutionary process. I don't think it happens all at once. And you're constantly having to check in with yourself to say, okay, how am I feeling? Is this the right environment? Are these the right kind of people? And so I think, but to at least know that you should, I didn't even know myself. I didn't know what that even, I've never heard that phrase before. Know myself. You know what I mean? So I think giving people some clarity in terms of asking themselves those questions so that they can get those answers in each of those 3 groups, and kind of bringing that knowledge together so that they can show up in a way that works for themselves and others.
Have you received pushback with the term personal branding? Because I feel like that has a negative connotation today.
Absolutely. And, I'll admit the first time I heard the term, I thought it was complete garbage. I was like, personal branding. And, I thought, I'm an authentic person, Dory. I'm not going to fit into somebody's box. What I realized is we have a personal brand, whether we want one or not. So it's like, if I'm going to have one, I might as well shape it into what I want it to be. And for me, when you think about a brand, it's just, what are the words and emotions that come to mind when someone says your name? What space do you occupy in people's heads? What is the value that you bring? What is the promise that you're trying to deliver on? That's your brand. It's not your logo and your colors and all these sort of superficial things, right? And when I also tell people, because especially a lot of women and people of color, I think, struggle with personal branding because it kind of goes against how we've been socialized. We don't want to stand out and talk about ourselves, but I tell people the better your brand is, the more likely you are to be in the rooms where the decisions are being made about the people that you want to serve and have impact on. And so when I say it like that, that resonates with people. They're like, oh, now that I can get down with, as opposed to just making it all about me.
So that's interesting because it's a segue into a statistic I found with McKinsey and Company. It's 2021, where it says that Black employees encounter what they call a broken rung from entry-level jobs to managerial jobs, and that Black employees account for just 7% of managers, and the majority of them have a distrust of the workplace. So with all of that in mind, I guess what I'm wondering is, how do we address the issue? How do women of color address the issue of the hurdles that they are facing to get into that room?
And one of the things I say at the very beginning of my book is, all of the isms exist. Racism, sexism, all the phobias, they're all there, right? Unconscious bias, all of it is there. I definitely believe there's a shared sense of responsibility. I think about, organizations have a role to play, your manager, but also you as an individual. And my book is directed at the individual, but I fully acknowledge organizations need to work on themselves. They have not been designed with this face
in mind,
or people who look like me in mind, right? But while those organizations are fixing themselves, we can work on ourselves as well, and at the end of the day, practically speaking, we have financial obligations. So we need these jobs, whether we like it or not. And so it's like, how can I find a way to make this work while that organization is fixing itself?
Well, and there's so much power in what you're saying, because when you think about changing yourself as an individual, right, that lies within things you have control over.
Absolutely.
Whereas waiting for the organization, waiting for society, yes, those are all problems, and they're very real and serious problems. But to your point, there is self-work that we all can be doing at any given point. I really like that. And one other question it brings to mind, though, you had mentioned that oftentimes people of color don't want to stick out in a professional environment. My question is, what is the difference between cultural intelligence or sensitivity and assimilation? Whether or not someone is a person of color, how should we start to think about these ideas in like a day-to-day way?
I've heard somebody say there's maybe a difference between assimilation and acculturation, or trying to be a culture fit, which means I'm going to try to fit squarely into this box versus a culture add. And so I think it's something that we have to really wrestle with individually to see, what are my personal boundaries and what are things I'm not willing to compromise on? And then everything else is potentially up for grabs, right? And I'm willing to sort of step outside of my personal preferences or my comfort zone. But I think we have to figure out what that means for each one of us, right? So, and one of the things I talk about in my book is this idea of the continuum of authenticity. So I don't feel like authenticity is binary. I feel like it exists on a spectrum. And so we have to figure out where are we willing to exist on that spectrum, So I say being my most authentic self is level 10, Carice. I'm loud. I probably have a deep Southern accent. You probably might not even understand what I'm saying. My husband, who's from New York, doesn't understand what I'm saying sometimes when I'm with my family. I'm not going to bring that version of me to work. I'm just not. I'm probably going to be a level 7 or 8. I'm still going to be fun. I'm still going to crack jokes and bring the laughter, but I'm going to keep it a little bit more professional. Now, if I say to myself, I'm never going to go below a level 5, I don't care. But if my organization needs me to be at a level 2, maybe that's not the place for me. And I have to start to develop that exit plan. What I cannot do is stay there and be bitter because they're trying to get me to be something that I'm not. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad place. It just means it's not for me. It's asking me to do things I'm not comfortable with. So I think we just have to figure out where we want to play on that spectrum and then, try to position ourselves in places and around people who value where we want to, kind of our range on that spectrum.
Has anything changed on that range for you from being a young Carice to being an experienced Carice?
Yeah, I think when I was younger, I used to straighten my hair. And that for me is one of my hard and fast boundaries is I don't straighten my hair anymore. I will get it like blow dried straight, but I don't chemically straighten my hair anymore. And I think back in the day, I couldn't understand. My sister, when she went natural, I hope she listens to this. I thought she was crazy when she returned to wearing her hair. Yeah, exactly. I literally thought she had lost her. I was like, are you okay? Do you need to see a therapist? Like, what? No one wears their hair like that. And now I'm so committed to wearing my hair in a natural state because I don't feel like I need to straighten it. There's nothing wrong with the way my hair grows out of my scalp.
Yeah.
And I know that's a huge struggle for a lot of Black women. For corporates that are listening to this, you have no idea how much of our cognitive capacity we use thinking about this hair and how we need to wear it so people don't think that we've been radicalized or that we're or that
God forbid you have an Angela Davis, right?
Yeah, and the thing I want companies to understand is there is a cost to try to make people fit in because all of that mind space we're using to think about this hair, we could be using to solve the problem or serve the clients or the customers that you want us to serve.
Absolutely.
So there's a cost to that pressure to sort of,
a big cost.
Yeah, assimilate. And so that for me is like one of my hard and fast. Like, I will not compromise on that. And I think the older I've gotten to, I'm just much more comfortable in my own skin. And so I show up much more authentically than I did, 15, 20 years ago. My sister laughs at me when she used to call my voicemail when I worked at Arthur Anderson. The first time she called, she said, "Who is that white woman on your voicemail?" And I said, "Oh, that white woman is me." But I thought that's what I had to do. I thought I had to have a white voice and be this like stiff professional to be taken seriously and to have credibility. And I realized it served me in the short term, but that would not have been sustainable long term because that's not who I am.
It's not who you are. Absolutely. And do you feel that over the past decades that there has been a positive shift?
Absolutely. The thing is, sometimes you can look at where we are now and get very sort of despondent and discouraged. But when you look back to where we started, when I started working, nobody was talking about DE&I.
Oh, yeah. It didn't exist.
Yeah. Mental health, well-being, whole person. No one cared. Like it was like, get in here and do this job and do it well. Leave all of that at the door.
If you don't like it, you can quit and bye. Yeah.
So I feel like we've talked about inclusive leaders and leaders being vulnerable and authentic. This was language that we were not using 20 years ago. So I think we're getting there. I think we still have a long way to go. But when I see young people now wearing their braids at work and wearing their afro, I'm like, wow, guys, like that was something we just didn't do back in the day. And so, like I said, we've got a lot of work to do, but there's been a lot of progress that's been made too. And so I acknowledge that.
And when you talk about work that needs to be done, I wanted to ask you, and this is a little bit putting you on the spot, so you don't have to answer it, but I thought it would be interesting if you were to take the grade system, A, B, C, D, E, F, right? And this is a huge generalization, I realize. But to look at corporate America today and how its relationship with Black professionals, where would you give it an A, generally speaking, to an F?
Ooh, that's a good question. Honestly, I'd probably give it a D. I don't know if I'm a hard grader, Doria, but I think, especially you think about what happened in 2020 with George Floyd's murder and a lot of the hype. I don't think it sustained itself because I don't think there was real.
It was performative.
Yeah, it was performative. I don't think it was real substantive change. And when you look at the percentages of corporate boards and people of color, Black people that are on those boards, you look at executives, whatever the industry is, nobody is killing it. Nobody.
Absolutely. To bring up that point, right? Another stat that I found that was related to this is what you said. Corporate America was not created with people of color
Absolutely.
Or women in mind.
Yeah.
On the current trajectory, this was the same report as before, it would take about 95 years for Black employees to reach talent parity, which is 12%. That's what it is right now across all levels of the private sector. And so we're not doing a good job.
Nope, we're not there. We're nowhere close to where we should be.
Do you think it's because corporations put money towards diversity, equity, and inclusion as kind of like a check the box? Or do you think that they, and it probably varies, are truly committed?
I think there's probably a range, right? I think, there are some that are just doing it to be able to, put it on the website. And I think there are some that are really committed. What I found is, I think a couple things. I think people have to figure out what are some of those sacred cows that you're willing to give up in order to advance, right? So for example, certain companies I've worked for say we only recruit at the top 3 to 5% of schools in a country. Well, if you look at South Africa, you got a lot of people who are really poor, who maybe they got into those top schools, but they couldn't afford to go there. So they've gone to a second tier school. Does that mean they're any less smart? No. And that is definitely a part of the legacy of apartheid where people don't have the resources to be able to afford to go. So are you willing to bend on some of your hard and fast rules in order to find that talent that is Black or is a woman or, Latino or whatever it is, right? Are you willing to bend on some of those rules? Or are you going to stick to that, Because then you say you want to find people of color, you want to find women, but you are recruiting in places where they're not there.
Right.
You know what? In large numbers. So I think that for me is, and I think the other thing is we need to be measuring leaders on DE&I. Like, we need to stop depending on the goodness of people's hearts. People who want to do it out of the goodness of their hearts, they're already doing it.
And it probably always have been.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like, you got to hit people where it matters. Hit people in their performance ratings, hit people in their bonuses, their, comp.
Yes.
Like, make it matter. I think that's a missing piece for me. And I think the other piece is sometimes I think people are waiting on a policy or a procedure. But if you are a senior leader in an organization, and I'm going to just pick on white men for a second.
That's okay. I do it all the time. So
if you are a white man and all of your sponsees, all the people that you are sponsoring and advocating and defending are all white men, but your company is 10% Black or, 12% Latinos, your mentee or your sponsee group needs to mirror the demographics of your organization. And you don't need to wait on a policy change, a procedure, a process change. You can do that tomorrow. And I'm not saying that you need to kick white men out of your sponsee group, but I'm saying, can you expand? Can you expand the group to include some people who don't look like you, who don't come from the same background as you?
Absolutely. And that you're right. That is so simple and does not require a mandate from HR.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. People have to look, and I saw this a lot in South Africa too. The term they use in South Africa is transformation. And so, people want to talk about, we're going to transform this organization. Yeah, but you transform you. Think about what you can do differently tomorrow, next week, next month, next year that could move the needle forward, that you don't have to wait on the company to change its policies or procedures. Start with yourself. Because transformation doesn't happen out here. It happens here.
Yes.
And we need to start with ourselves first.
So you were saying you hope your sister listens to this. I hope my 18-year-old daughter listens to this, because there are certain, lifestyle changes that she's going to make when she goes to college. And I'm like, well, actually, it could start even today with a baby step, because
yeah, absolutely,
it's human nature to just kind of put off things that you're scared of, but you're going to run into the same things over and over again if you don't address them.
Absolutely. And that's the whole thing I've tried to say in my book, is focusing on what can you control and influence. All this other stuff out here, we're waiting on other people to change or organizations to change, and they need to change. But what is it that I can control? And it makes you feel more empowered and more like you're in control of your own destiny when you focus on those things, as opposed to, what a lot of these stats are saying or the research is saying about this topic. So it's important.
Absolutely. And to get back to your book, one of the themes that you talk about is for people to work in their career versus on their career. Can you explain what that distinction is and give a practical example of what that might look like?
So when I was living in South Africa, I ran a small business for a little while. And, in the entrepreneurial world, there are these terms. And one of them was working in your business versus working on your business. So let's say, for example, I have a cupcake business. Working in my business is sourcing my ingredients, mixing up my cupcakes, baking them, delivering them. Working on my business is taking a step back and saying, should I even be selling cupcakes? Should I be selling cookies or brownies? It's asking ourselves those larger questions about the business. Am I selling the right things to the right people in the right places at the right price point? And I realized that same philosophy could transfer to our careers. I think a lot of times we get so busy just doing the job, which is working in the career, but working on the career is taking a step back and saying, am I developing the right skills at the right time, at the right level? Am I building the right relationships with the right key stakeholders and decision makers? I think we need to take that step back, because I think what oftentimes happens is we're really good at what we do, but we're not really thinking about the next step and what is the next set of skills that we need to be developing. And then we see other people who we don't think are as smart as us advance, and we're like, well, how is this possible? Like, I'm smarter than that person. It's like, yeah, but they have the right relationships. And they've been developing other skills that are going to prepare them to be successful at that next level. And all you've done is think about what you're doing right now. I mean, I actually saw a video on TikTok. This guy was saying he was passed over for a promotion twice at this bank, and he felt like it was racism. And I, my response in that video was, well, did you tell your manager you wanted to be promoted? And did you have a conversation about what's the promotion criteria and what's the gap between where you are and that promotion criteria?
Right.
And what are the opportunities that your manager could help you get access to that will help you fill those gaps? So instead of, automatically thinking it's racism or sexism or some sort of phobia, focus on, did you do the right things to best position yourself to get that promotion? And once you've done all those things and you still don't get it, then you can say racism or sexism or whatever the phobia is, right? But you got to focus on the things that you should be doing to set yourself up for success.
And so your book outlines those steps.
Yeah, I talked about, getting that feedback, making sure, you're having those conversations to progress, in a way that is important in that environment. Because you're thinking, oh, I'm doing a great job in this job. It's like, yeah, but the next job, nobody's going to pay you more money to do the same thing. You're going to have to do something differently, have a different set of skills or elevate it at a certain level in order to advance. And so you need to be building on those, because oftentimes people want to see you demonstrate those skills before they give you the title and the money to protect you and to protect them and the organization. So you need to be demonstrating those things now. But unless you ask those questions and have those conversations, you can't do that.
It almost makes me want to jump back into the corporate world and give it a go, but not quite. I've spoken a lot about challenges, but you are a very accomplished woman. And I wondered if there is one thing, either personally or professionally, that you're particularly proud of.
Oh, that's an excellent question. I think writing this book, because it's something I never would have, this was not on my bucket list. And I've always been a pretty avid reader. And I can remember starting to read books and thinking, how did somebody sit down to a blank piece of paper and write 200, 300 pages? Like my mind was just always blown. And to think that I've actually done that, it's just crazy to me. And that's why I tell everybody, I think everybody could write at least one book because everybody's got a story. And if I could do it, anybody could do it. But that, for me, I think just persevering, through, I was working a full-time job and editing this book and, through COVID and a move, from South Africa back to the US, I continued to keep talking about it. Yeah. So I'm really proud that I've stuck with it.
That's a lot of tenacity.
Yeah, absolutely.
If there is one key takeaway as we wrap up for women of color to keep in mind based on our conversation today about being a Black woman in America as a professional, what would it be?
Okay, so I'm gonna cheat, Dory. I'm gonna give you 3.
Oh, good. I always ask for 3. I noticed that, and then I'm like, I'm gonna ask for 1 this time, just to be different.
So I think the first one is managing your mindset. Like your mind and the way you think about things is the most powerful asset that you have. You can have 2 people in the same situation who view things so differently. So managing your mindset, and I think that when you think about doing that, think about who you surround yourself with, the materials you consume, what you watch on television. All of these things feed into, your mindset. So I think that's the number 1. The number 2 for me is taking ownership, really focusing on what you can control, what you can influence, delivering your very best, no matter what set of circumstances you're in, I think is really key, sort of pushing through obstacles, which, Black women, we're born to do. We've been doing that. And then I think the third one is that success requires collaboration. You will never reach your full potential. You will never have the type of impact you want to have if you try to go it alone. You need other people, whether it's your manager, mentors, more importantly, sponsors, peers, direct reports. Like, you need other people. So really taking the time to nurture those relationships, because I think that is honestly the differential in terms of being successful versus not, and having the impact you want to have versus not. Those are my 3 takeaways.
Those are really helpful, I think, for anyone in corporate America.
Absolutely.
And I really appreciate them. Where can the audience learn more about you and your book and the work that you do?
So you can go to my website, CariceAnderson.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Carice Anderson. And, go buy a copy of my book, or 10, and write me an Amazon review, guys. I need my Amazon reviews to go.
Yes, do it. And I think this has been an amazing conversation. I am so grateful for your time, your expertise, and your authenticity.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
You've been listening to SheVentures. Like what you heard? You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and sign up for our newsletter so you never miss a show.